Okay. Good evening, members. To start, can we please observe a minute of silence in honor of His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who sadly passed away on 9th of April 2021. 1 minute, please observe the silence if you can stand up for it. Thank you. Thank you. Can I welcome you to the Planning Committee meeting being held virtually due to current coronavirus COVID-19 restrictions on public gatherings. Can I ask members present to introduce themselves, please? I'll start with myself and the Councillor Wazanfar Ali, chairing this meeting. Let's start with Marilyn.
Yes, I'm Councillor Marilyn Ashton. I'm the Conservative spokesman on this committee.
And Jenna.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Anjana Patel. I'm a full member of this committee. Thank you.
Ajay.
Good evening, all. Councillor Ajay Maru for Kenton West and as a reserve member on the Planning Committee.
Simon.
Hello, I'm Councillor Simon Brown. I'm Vice Chair of this committee.
Christopher.
I'm Councillor Christopher Baxter and I'm a full member of the Planning Committee.
Paimana.
I'm Councillor Paimana Asad and I'm a full member of the committee.
Thank you. Can I refer the members to publish the protocols of holding virtual meetings? Noting the members should have their videos on at all times, but put their microphone on mute unless speaking. In case of technical problems, the meeting will adjourn until resolved. If a member loses connection, the meeting will adjourn until reconnected. If a technical problem persists and the meeting is incorrect, the meeting will be abandoned to a later date. When voting, members are to state, I have heard the discussion and I vote to grant and refuse the application. The meeting shall go by the clock on the members' personal computers, and please note the meeting is being videoed, audio recorded, and will be available to watch and listen to on the website. Now, please attendance by the reserve members. Ajay, you're reserving for Keith?
That's right, Chair. I'm reserving for Councillor Keith Ferry. Thank you, Chair.
I've got Councillor Norman Stevenson to speak on agenda items 202 and 203, not court applications.
Yes, I am here, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Can we take as read the published declaration of interest for the meeting? And I remind members that they need to leave the meeting if they have a disclosable pecuniary interest in an item on the agenda. Are there any further declaration of interest from other members? No, none. Minutes. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on 17th of March 2021? These will be
Agreed.
Agreed.
these and will be signed as a correct record at a later date. Public questions. I got one public question from Mr. Mark Malvana. Would you please read your question?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can the planning committee confirm that where a current site has D1 status usage and has always been occupied as a place of worship since the inception of the D1 status, then will it, in the council's understanding, be classed as F1 status as per the new definitions that were implemented in September 2020? Is that
Thank
clear?
you, Mr. Malvana. Yeah. Yes, I agree with you. The change in the legislation introduced in September 2020 means that the place of public worship falls within the new use class F1, and that's how I'm going to use it in future. The place of worship will be classed at
Okay, so a D1 status becomes an F1 status.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, so can I just follow up question on that? So basically, if we have a I don't know, how St Mary's Church, Harrow on the Hill, has possibly an F1 status, and they decided to they no longer wanted to worship in Harrow, and another church came forward with a market bid for St Mary's Church, Harrow. They would be looked upon favourably as moving, Harrow would accept the continuation of the F1 status if another religious organisation.
It will be F1 status, but we have to look into that because I don't think so. It might come to planning committee. I don't think so it's in the remit, but we'll look into that in future.
Okay, thank you very much. And just like to say what a great job you're doing, and we're very happy with the diligence that you're all putting into the planning.
Thank you.
We hope that you can leave party politics behind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Petitions. Yeah.
Chairman, if I may, please forgive me. I'm a little bit perturbed that a question that would have been asked by Mr. Mike Williams was disallowed. And it was a perfectly reasonable question that is related to planning. And it's in respect of the importance of allocating the seal money for the benefit of the people in the ward on the back of planning applications. I'm not going to read the question out word for word because I don't want to waste time, but I'd like to register my heartfelt objection to the fact that a perfectly reasonable question from a very very diligent member of the public living in West Harrow has been disallowed by this administration and this.
No, Marilyn, just can I stop you there, because it's not in the remit of planning committee, and our constitution provides at paragraph 17.11 that question from the public that's a matter for the cabinet.
That's wrong. This is related to planning, and I think it's
extremely legal advice. So I think
I think the legal advice is challengeable, and it looks very bad. Thank you.
This is, as far as I'm concerned, it's not in the remit of planning committee. Thank you.
Well, you're mistaken, Chair.
Can we proceed now? Petitions. One petition has been received on the application 201, front of North Court 86 Ricksman North Road, and 202 North Court existing 86 Ricksman Road. Ms. Munza Al Naib could please read the terms of your petition to the meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, Munza there.
Hello.
Hello, yeah, we can hear you.
We are presenting an e-petition with 214 names and addresses. We obviously unable to gather signatures due to COVID-19 pandemic. Stop the overdevelopment of Northcote. Harrow Council has recommended for grant 2 planning applications on the Northcote site, which will add 17 new flats to the existing 24. This overdevelopment will destroy a significant part of the green land around Northcote. It will affect the well-being of the people living on the site and around it. This will impact you if you commute via Rickmansworth Road for work, school, essential shopping, or leisure. These plans will increase traffic jams, endanger traffic and pedestrian movement on this vital road. This will impact you if you, your family members, or your customers need to park along the Rickmansworth Road. The developers did not plan enough parking to accommodate all the cars, and cars will spill over on the road. This will impact you if you care about preserving gardening land and clean air in Pinner. These plans will destroy Northcote Greenland, which has provided this community with a lot of comfort during the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the many trees that we will lose is the last remaining tree of the pear orchard that have occupied this land in the 19th century. The increase in congestion will increase air pollution as well. Please sign this petition. Tell Harrow Council to listen to Northcote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alnaib. Your petition will be referred to the corporate director, community, and the relevant portfolio holder. Thank you for your attending and for your petition.
Thank you.
I think there's a petition by the members. Norman, you got a petition to present?
No, I don't have, Mr. Chairman, surprisingly.
Okay, all right, thank you, because now next item is the deputations. No deputation requests have been received. References from the councils and other committee panels not received. Addendum, do we accept all the addendum? Okay.
Yes, that's accepted. Except it's rather suspicious in some respects.
Representation on the planning application has been received in respect of application 201-202. Now, before I go on to our applications, I will request my colleagues that myself and Paimana are fasting this month of Ramadan. So we would like to take a 10-minute break at 8 o'clock. Do you accept it, please? It'll be all right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yes,
Yes, of course.
A 10-minute break at 8 o'clock.
I wish you both Ramadan Mubarak. And
Yeah, Ramadan Mubarak
I
too.
hope
Thank
you
you.
fast well. And,
Thank you. Now,
Likewise.
right, we have got now 201 front of Northcote 86 Rickmansworth Road. Kimmery, could you please present application? Thank you.
Yes, good evening. Are you all able to see the presentation on the screen?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So we will be dealing with 2 applications. All right, here we go. 2 applications tonight, which relate to the site that is currently under the address of Northcote. The first application we are looking at involves the front parcel of land towards the site, which is outlined in red here. The second application, which we'll look at later, will involve the existing building, which is located to the rear here. I have some aerial views of the area here, which show both the area to the front, which is the application we're dealing with now, and the existing building, along with the surrounding residences. These are some of the pictures of the area around the driveway, the curved driveway, as well as the main entrance. The curved driveway, which contains a secondary access, will be removed as part of this development. The application is to redevelop this parcel of land to provide a 2-story building with a habitable loft level. This is consistent with an extent permission that has been granted on site for a 2-story bedroom. The main differences between this and the extent permission is that there is now an additional 2-bedroom flat, which will occupy the habitable roof space. There are other minor changes, for example, to the design of the building and to the car parking and waste layout. Site layout is here. You can see that the car parking has been divided to the left-hand side, which includes disabled parking, and the bin stores have been moved away so that they are no longer immediately adjacent to the neighbor at number 88. There's also an amenity space and cycle storage provided at the rear of the building. So the floor plans for the 8 1-bedroom flats occupying the ground floor and the first floor, and the second floor, which contains a 2-bedroom flat. This is the design which is currently proposed under this application to the front and the rear. The windows to the rear have been designed to avoid overlooking towards the existing building. This is the site as it was proposed under the extant permission. You can see if you look at the overall layout of the site and the size and footprint of the building, it is approximately the same. And this is the previous design that has been permitted and does currently have permission. The proposed development would make a small contribution to the housing stock in the borough, and the quality of accommodation provided does comply with the space standards. And the traffic and parking impacts have been determined to be within reason and would be considered to comply with the policy requirements for parking. A Section 106 would be applied to this application, also to the concurrent application we'll be looking at next. That will require whichever development comes first to make a payment to the local authority to make improvements to the junction, which is the main access to this site. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Pamana?
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. Thank you very much for that presentation. Did the developers do their own consultation regarding this new building?
Not particularly that I'm aware of.
Okay. Do the rules say that the developer should do a consultation with residents?
Not for a development of this size, no.
Okay. On page 148.6.59, am I, yeah?
Yeah, I'll find that. Yep, go ahead.
Yep. The double yellow lines are said not to be quite adequate according to residents who use the entrance of Northcote. I just wanted to know whether officers looked at other options apart from double yellow lines, and if so, what were these other options?
This is the option that has been recommended by the Highways Authority. I did speak to the Highways officer again yesterday, and one of the things she said to me was that it should be appreciated that it is highly unusual to take this kind of step, that this is more than would normally be done. So this is what they recommend be done in this case.
Can I just jump in to say that we do have Barry Phillips with us this evening, so if there are specific questions, he may also be able to assist. Thank you.
I just wanted to know whether, because you know, having read some of the suggestions on here from residents, there was a suggestion of traffic lights installed in this place. Is that even a viable option? Is that something
that would be far outside the scope of what we would be able to ask for of the developer under a planning application? That could be put to the Highways Authority separately, and they would have to consider it separately.
And who would do that? Who would put that through?
Local residents, perhaps, councillors, whoever might be involved.
Okay. And then my last question was, how can residents feed into like further changes? Say there's an unintended issue that comes up whilst the building is being built. How can residents feed into adding minor changes into this or feedback? What's the democratic process that the planning committee has for things like that?
What kind of changes or problems are you talking
I'm just talking any general changes that should a problem arise or something happen whilst this building is being constructed. I just want to understand how residents would be able to raise that issue with the council, for example, through our planning committee.
Beverly, I think
I'll pick that up. So if matters come up that residents are concerned about, they can contact us. If they are concerned that the plans are not being adhered to, they can contact us through planning enforcement and we'll look into it. If there are changes to the scheme, that may well necessitate a fresh planning application, depending on the extent of the changes, in which case we would repeat the process that we have just done at the moment.
Okay.
So there are two ways that they can, either through a formal amendment to the scheme where we would do our normal statutory consultation, or if there was concern it wasn't being built in accordance with the plans, then we would ask the enforcement team to investigate.
Okay, and then so my last question would be in terms of that being reported back to us, to councillors, because obviously if that communication is going directly to planning officers, enforcement officers, how would members of the planning committee know? I understand that this application might be granted and therefore we move on to the next thing. I just wanted to understand whether councillors, how we would be updated on that.
I would, in many cases, anyone who's making a complaint will copy in their councillors in any event, so we'll keep an eye on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Answer, I think
I was muted. Marlene, yeah? You're muted. Marlene?
My turn, sorry. I think Councillor Baxter was before me, but it doesn't matter really. Just to say, just to be helpful to Councillor Assad, we normally rely on ward councillors for this kind of detail. Hence, Councillor Stevenson's backbenching tonight on behalf of his residents, as it were. And also, if there's any problem with the construction phase, environmental health legislation is actually, in some respects, a better way. Say, for example, they're building outside of the normal hours. Environmental health legislation is far, far more appropriate to use and more effective in some respects than planning legislation. If there's any disturbance, say they're building all day on a Sunday or something like that. I just think that might be useful for you to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if officers could recap on the access to public transport that this site has and the nearest, so access to the tube, for example, or the nearest bus route, and how well connected this is for the number of new residents that would be going into it.
Yeah, so I believe the PTAL is 2. However, the Northwood Hills station is about a 15-minute walk away. I would note that in the appeal that was previously heard through the PINS process on an application that was refused in 2017, the inspector in that case actually did specifically deal with that issue and did note that in his opinion it was reasonably connected given the proximity of the bus routes and of the station there. That I think is relevant to this considering this application in that respect.
Thank you, Kimmeris. Anjana, you got a question?
Yes, I have. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm talking about the first application, 201, which is going to have extra 2-story, which obviously was granted in 2019. Yeah.
Yes.
Unfortunately, obviously, I think I was on the committee, and I don't think we, as a Conservative councillors, agreed with it. But I'm just looking at the I know it's nothing to do with it, but I'm just saying that this is not keeping in with the area and the street scene or whatever you say, because these 2 floors which they're going to put on is with balcony. Are the other floors also with balcony? Because I can't, because we didn't have, sorry Chair, but because we didn't have a site visit, it is really difficult to actually see, you know, for yourself, like what it is like. And these 2 added floor, are they different to whatever is already there? Because these has got balconies.
Yeah, you're comparing it to the existing Northcott building, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes,
because
the addition of balconies, the previous building would have been built in an era when possibly it was not required to have balconies. It is required to have a private amenity space as part of the current space standards. But also I would say that the inclusion of balconies does not mean that it's not in keeping with the existing pattern of development in the local area. It's a minor variation. That is not enough to I would say, take it out of keeping with the pattern of development.
Anyway, I think it is way too bulky, and not only that, it is not in keeping with the area, because I personally feel that it's a residential area with all the houses around it, and this is going to look really, really bulky. And we've seen something like this which was rejected in another area. So that's the question, that it's not really keeping in the area. And traffic issue has already been addressed by a couple of members here, so I won't go on about it. Thank you.
I would note that whilst there are some 2-story houses immediately adjacent and across the street, there are also immediately adjacent and a few doors down several large blocks of flats.
As I said, it is difficult to say because we haven't seen it. So again, Chair, I would urge you to go back to visiting, have a site visit for the applications which are very, very controversial, and something which is not that we can actually make a decision by looking at the papers. Thank you very much.
Simon, you got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, just before my question, I did in fact visit this site this afternoon. Any member of committee could have visited this site because it is accessible, and I could see for myself the application site and the existing buildings, so that was quite clear and quite easy to do. It's only just down the Rickmansworth Road, past Pinner Green. What I would like, if officers could just refresh committee's memory as to how the current application has overcome the reasons for rejection back in June 2020, when the applicant was had applied to increase the number of flats by adding a 3rd story roof space. How has that been addressed, and why are we now able to recommend approval?
So sorry, Councillor Brown, this arises from the fact that we're dealing with 2 applications on a site that used to be a single site and has now been subdivided. The application that you're referring to is actually the one we'll be looking at next, so it's not directly evolved. It's not directly in the line of evolution relating to this one. I can explain that question when we deal with the next application.
Thank you, Kimmery. I got one question. So are we going, I mean, we're not going to lose any green space like garden in front of, and could you just go back and say that is particular children, they won't, they will be able to play as they are. So we're not losing any green space which is available at the moment. Thank you.
Well, there is green space in the sense that there is soft landscaping, which includes grassed areas and trees, and that will be lost. The size, the communal garden area, which includes those soft landscaped areas, will be reduced for the current occupiers of the existing building. However, we can look at this in the next application as well. The size of the retained communal garden space is considered to be sufficiently large to both provide adequate amenity for the occupiers and to provide a suitable setting for the retained building.
If I might also jump in there, just for clarity, In terms of the building towards the front that we're looking at now, this is as per the previous planning permission. So there is some loss of that green space. It was not considered to be garden space, and there is no change in material circumstances that would lead to another conclusion since the previous application was granted. So the principle of the siting of that block in that location has already been agreed.
And also, sorry to clarify, there's no designation of designated open space or green space there.
Thank you. Marilyn, you got a question? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, this is really just for clarification, because I know that the Labour Group didn't attend very much of the briefing yesterday because they had to go to a very important Labour Group meeting. So I don't know that you saw the video of the site, which actually you did. Well, that's very useful, because that made, although I have visited myself in person, had a walk round because I wanted to understand it better. But am I right in saying that a PTEL score of 2, 1B to 2 is nonetheless still relatively low, bearing in mind that you can have 6A? You know, there are grades of PTEL, and 2 is pretty much on the lowest quartile. And also, related to that, am I not right in saying that, and I completely understand what Beverly has said about the fact that we've got an established principle of development on this site for this application, but it is noteworthy that the carriage driveway disappears effectively, which is used, and I saw it myself when I was there, for informal parking. So am I right in saying, and I think it's important that everybody understands this, am I right in saying that although it's not formal parking, is nonetheless less parking, because this carriage drive will be eaten up by the development?
So there are two questions there. The first one relates to the PTAL. You are correct that that is a lower PTAL. However, it is very important to remember that the PTAL is just one aspect, and it certainly does not tell the whole story. PTALs can by themselves can be misleading, and if you you're certainly welcome to have a conversation with the highways officers, because they will also reinforce this. You do have to look very carefully at the context. Yes, it is true. You do have to look very carefully at the context and at the additional. Yes, it is true. In fact, Councillor Ashton, the PTAL does not tell the whole story.
I'm entitled to disagree with you. I don't think
okay.
Right. Okay, right.
The PTAL does not, in fact, tell the whole story, and it does not give you all the information you need. The context is also very important. I could, for example, refer you to a site that is directly across from a train station and has only a PTAL of 3. So you do need to consider the other factors involved. With regard to the second question that you have, the carriageway, it would result in a loss of what is now currently being used for informal parking. However, the principle of that and the acceptability of that has already been established by the extent permission.
Thank you. Marilyn, you are muted. Can't hear you. Is it okay? Okay, so we got
a bit, my machine went a bit wrong. The point I'm making, though, is that it's a statement of fact, though, that because of the extant permission, we've ended up with less informal parking overall on the cumulative sites.
I believe that is correct.
Thank you. Can we proceed further? We got one objector to speak, Nisha Chauhan, and then we got the applicant, Mr. Ian Gilbert, and then we got our backbencher, Councillor Norman Stevenson. So may I ask now Nisha Chauhan to please, you got 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, thank you everybody for the time. Okay, with regards to this planning application, my name is Nisha. I'm a mother and the owner-occupier of Flat 1 on the ground floor of Northcote. I'm speaking to you today on behalf of myself, my family, and more than 50 other families in Northcote and the surrounding area who will be severely impacted by both developments discussed in this meeting. I'm addressing you, councillors, as our elected representatives whose job is to protect our welfare and our rights. We are appealing to your duty of care and your conscience. I would now like to lay out our concerns regarding this planning application. The first of these concerns is the safety of our families. We do not feel the current plans ensure the safety of cars entering and exiting the site. We have tried to voice this many times in the planning department, and we feel we are not being heard. The planning inspector in March 2018, report highlighted our concern regarding safety. He stated, and I quote, that he could not discount that the intensification in use of the residual driveway would cause significant harm to highway safety resulting from poor junction visibility. The council responded to this by adding a condition for double yellow lines on either side of the one remaining entrance to Northcote. We feel that this condition does not go far enough. TfL reported 12 accidents along that stretch of the road in the last 3.5 years, yet we have been given no way to challenge the Council Highway Authority assessment. We asked the Planning Committee to demand that a reassessment be carried out to address this danger, this time with consultation with people living on the site and to examine the possibility of other safety measures, such as nearby traffic lights, a mini roundabout and/or keep clear road markings. We bought our flat. The green outlook was key in choosing Northcote as our family home. The 1.8 metre high dividing wall between the new development and Northcote is less than 4 metres from my living room window. It will not only eliminate our view and light, but also serve as a reminder of how the rights of original residents of Northcote are being disregarded in favour of future owners of the new development. In 2019, planning application number P236718 was granted despite the many objections raised. We are counting on you to do the right thing to this community. I ask you, would you want to live and raise your family here? Thank you.
Chair, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. May I ask applicant Ian Gilbert to speak now for 3 minutes, please?
Thank you, Chair. I had a list of things to go through actually in support of this planning application, and many of those things have been addressed by the planning officer, and we welcome the positive the positive recommendation from the planning officer. One thing that I just wanted to make clear about this planning application is that it is entirely separate from the planning application to extend Northcote, the existing building. This application relates only to the an amendment to the extant permission for a new building at the front of the site. That amendment is in essence the use of a loft space at the 2.5 story. The changes to the building in terms of maths, design, and external changes to the plot are exceedingly limited. And this application essentially comprises a more efficient use of a building than the council currently have, and adds to its housing land supply. Planning officers have set out that there's no concerns from any of its technical consultants with regard to design, with regard to amenity, or any technical high-risk issue. I do note and sympathise with the frustrations of residents, and I note the petition, and we are dealing with an application, and like I say, sympathise with. We are dealing with an application that was dealt with via the planning inspectorate, and then via your council. The principles of the acceptability of this development and to the front of Northcote have already been established, Chair, and I think that's very important to stress. And members are able to support this planning application and without any inference of a support of wider extensions. This simply relates to the use of a loft space with some minor additions, Chair. I won't go on any further, Chair. I think you've had a very sort of accurate and helpful description from your planning officer that I needn't add to. Thank you, members.
You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Councillor Norman Stevenson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Right, yeah, it was very interesting hearing some of the discussions earlier from the committee, because we absolutely mustn't confuse this. There were 2 applicants here and 2 sites, and this is one where there's been a previous approval, and what it is, it's a building that's going to be built in the space, and it is a green space that's going to disappear in front of the present building. Okay. And I think there was a bit of confusion came out in some of that discussion, but we absolutely must be clear about what we're looking at here. I remember speaking against this before, and I don't think it should have been allowed. It is a green space in front of another building. Some trees are going to be removed. They might not be preserved trees, but they are going to be removed, and there's a loss of green space. Look, we definitely need more housing. There's no question about it. There's a plan, a London plan, we have a local plan, but what we're talking about here is cramming in a small building to build 9 flats. It's going to make very little difference to an overall target on housing, and we need the housing, but we need to make sensitive and sensible decisions, caring about communities. And clearly, if you've seen that film put forward by the residents and whatever, you know, they've shown you around the premises, and people are going to be really affected by this. And I think it's one of the best examples, and it's been alluded earlier, that we absolutely have to get back to site visits. And I think it's inexcusable that they're not happening at the moment. I know we have COVID, but we can all make our way individually to a site to have a look at it. We're making decisions that affect people's lives without actually really understanding the site. And I think, with respect, committee, there's been confusion from some of you as to what you're actually considering. Right, yeah, yes, there were changes. This is going to be a higher building than was previously considered. Get 1 more flat out of it. Well, you know, is that really going to be a big thing to give it this approval? And also there was some issue previously about where the waste bins were going to be sited, etc. I know that's been addressed, but that's just, I think it's just been a bit of a mess. And residents, they've watched all this happen over the years, because this has gone on for years, and they really think some very strange decisions have been made. A pear tree, which establishes the last remaining tree from an orchard back in the 19th century, and that's going to disappear. Well, you know, it's not preserved, but I do think you should be taking these sorts of things into account when making decisions. But one of the really big issues with this site is that currently there's a carriageway driveway, 2 entrances to it off the Rickmansworth Road. Now, the Rickmansworth Road is unfortunately a straight road. There's speeding on it. You know, we're working to try and get something done about that. Lots of parked vehicles, and you take your life in your hands pulling out of this development onto that road. Near misses happen all the time. And what we're going to do is close one of the exits and have more cars on site, and just 1 entrance point now. It's really strange. Councillor Assad actually threw up some questions and issues about that. She's absolutely right to highlight it. I know some of this is not planning considerations, but we've got to consider, by doing this, the impact on the road and the residents. I always like to think to myself, would I like to live there? Would I like to experience this? And they're not experiencing good things. So the access to cars, and there are going to be more cars, despite the fact there's not going to be enough cars probably, or spaces, it is quite dangerous and really has to be considered. I think also it was great to hear some some questions about what help can be given to residents if a builder's on site and things aren't complied with. They aren't really planning considerations, but I think it shows that we as a group of councillors care about the residents, and I hope that the decision will be made to support these residents with this. I've said enough, but I think it is key to absolutely not confuse these two applications. And this one, I just think it's plain wrong to put a building where there isn't a building at the moment in front of all these residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. So any comments? Marilyn?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I am really disappointed. As you well know, I am not shy to say I disagree with things, and it is what we are supposed to do is have an opinion on this committee, and it can differ and often does differ from that of the officers. The trouble is that if we didn't have an extant permission, there'd be absolutely no way that I could be compelled to support this. It is completely unacceptable. In fact, it's horrendous that it actually was granted when it was. I don't understand how that happened. It was a mistake, and it is an indelible scar. It can never be healed, because even if a permission expires, and sometimes they do, if it even has a planning history, it still is an indelible scar. We've come across this before, because consistency is very important in planning law. So unfortunately, and I absolutely totally hate saying this, because I agree 100% with what's been said by both the objector and also a colleague, Councillor Stevenson, who is incredibly upset about this. I know he must be, but we, in my view, our hands are tied. We can't refuse something that's been granted. There's a minor change to this development by putting additional accommodation in effectively the loft. It is assuming that one isn't absolutely shocked and upset at the fact that this in fact has permission as a matter of principle. This is a slightly nicer design, I suppose, and the bin storage is in a slightly better place, but that doesn't make up for the fact that it's absolutely the worst thing. In fact, you couldn't make this up. When I visited the site, I was heartbroken to see what was going to happen to it. I just hope, there's a faint hope, and I'm sure it won't happen, that the people that have got the, as it were, the right to construct this will think twice about it before doing it. I doubt whether that will happen, but you just never know in life. You can only ask, because it would be just so good if this didn't happen to this lovely area. It is absolutely a travesty. So I shan't be voting for this, Chairman, but it is not, unfortunately, a sustainable argument for refusal, because it already has permission, and I'm afraid that is the way it is. I'm just sorry that the majority, the Labour councillors on this committee, the majority on this committee, saw fit to vote for this before. They've made a really bad mistake. Thank you.
Imana, you got a question or comments?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to follow up. Thank you so much to Nisha for her statement in regards to the safety issues. I think obviously that's concerning, especially when families have small children. I just wanted to ask one small question of officers in terms of those safety issues. Can they just highlight how they've mitigated some of those concerns in regards to, small children being in the vicinity of the area whilst a building is being built? I just want to just understand that a little bit better, if it's possible.
You've asked about the construction phase.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, the safety around that.
All outside of our remit, and that would be controlled through things like considerate contractor, environmental health regulations, etc., that control how a construction site is run.
Okay, and then I just had another question in regards to, I mean, this kind of follows up from what Councillor Ashton said. You know, this is an application that's already been granted a previous planning committee, so there are no legal reasons as to why this application should be refused.
Not in terms of anything that has previously been found acceptable within that existing permission. Well, yeah, it would be, yes.
Okay. So that means that we'd have to vote for this because it's been previously granted and therefore there are no legal reasons to reject it.
If there were differences between this application and the previous application that would reasonably form a reason for refusal, that could be considered. It would be difficult to put forward a refusal on something that has previously been granted and considered acceptable.
Okay, thank you very much for answering my questions. I just wanted to say, you know, as a Labour councillor on this committee, I've listened to and heard the concerns of residents, and it's concerning. I wasn't on the planning committee previously when this was granted. However, the questions that I've raised today, I hope that gives some clarity to residents to say that, you know, we have listened and I've tried to highlight some of the issues here. But unfortunately, because this has been granted previously, we're going to have to vote for it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Pamela. Can we just take a vote on? I've heard all the discussion and a vote to grant the application. Thank you. May I ask Christopher?
I've heard all the discussion, Chair, and I vote to abstain.
Merlin?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Thank you. And Jenna?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Thank you. Simon?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Pamela?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Ajay?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and vote to grant.
Thank you. Also, the application is granted. Thank you. Can we go on to the next one, 202? Camry is again. Yeah. Thank you.
I'll just load that up for you. Okay, that should be on your screens now. Okay, so now we are moving on to deal with this part of the site outlined, of the larger site, I should say, outlined in red. This is the second site, which now does form a separate parcel of land under different ownership, to be clear. This involves the existing building, for which it is proposed to add an additional story. These are some photos that show a bit more of the existing building, which we didn't look at as closely in the previous. This photo shows the site plan. So at the ground floor, the footprint of the building will remain the same. However, there will be changes to the curtilage, which will include an increase in the number of parking spaces with the formalization of the parking layout and a new bin storage area, as well as landscaping to the retained communal garden area, which you can see here, which would include some new play space as well. This is the existing building shown here. Going back to the question from previous about the fact that there was a previous refusal on this application from earlier in 2020. This is the existing building here. This is what's being proposed now. You can see that it takes very much the same consistent architectural pattern from the existing with the hipped roofs. And I'll just go down here. This is a view of what the refused plan looked like, which had the mansard roofs with the dormer. This was the primary issue that was considered, and it was not considered that this design was acceptable. The existing design here, which does replicate what is in the architectural design of the existing building, is considered now acceptable. So the new flats would be proposed on the 3rd floor, the additional 3rd floor. All of the flats do meet the required space standards for accommodation quality. And this would also result in addition to the housing stock, and the quality of accommodation would be considered acceptable. The rationalization of the traffic and parking would be considered to be helpful, and there is a condition which would require both a parking management plan and servicing and delivery controls. Are there any questions on this application?
Any questions? Paimana?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know if it's legal to grant planning permission to build further stories on a building when leases did not cover the construction of new flats in the roof space.
That would fall outside of planning. That's a legal matter that would be between, if there was any issue, it would be between the two parties involved or multiple parties involved in any lease or land ownership dispute or rights of access or anything of that nature. That would be a legal matter between those two parties, and we would not be able to, as part of planning control, interfere in that or moderate between it.
Okay, so there's no legal, precedent in planning laws that say that that has to be included in a lease for.
No, that is outside of our area of authority. We have no authority to get into that.
Okay, thank you. And I have two more questions. The other question is in regards to the maintenance of the building. I understand the concerns raised by residents in the report is that the maintenance of the building isn't adequate. And therefore my question is it correct to be building further stories on an existing building that residents say is not maintained adequately? One, and two, has a survey been done of the structure of the building and whether it's okay to be built on? I'm guessing it has, but I just want to clarify that.
I see Beverly just turned on.
I'll jump in on that. Those elements of the process dealt with through the building regulations should planning permission be granted. So in terms of whether I'm looking at Councillor Patel because we had this discussion on a different siting briefing. So planning permission is granted, then they will have to go through the whole building regulation approval where they do their structural calculations and so forth to ensure it is structurally sound and it can be safely constructed. In relation to how the building is kept at the moment, unfortunately we have to look at planning issues and we have to focus on what the planning matters before us are. I would hope that the landlord, in taking this forward, would seek to keep his new building or new extended building in a good state of repair. However, their current behaviour cannot be considered in terms of whether or not to grant planning permission.
Okay.
We know the applicant's agent is here. He has spoken on a previous application. I'm sure he will take those comments back and reflect that to the management company.
Okay. So if I'm understanding this correctly, planning permission will be granted and then the structural issues would be looked at.
The full structural calculations and the details will come forward as the building progresses on site. Yes, that is.
And that's standard planning law that has to be followed?
It's not planning law, it's the building regulations. It's a completely separate regulatory system. So we are looking at the principle of the development, how it's going to be, how it is built on site is governed by separate legislation and is outside the remit of the planning committee. It is dealt with through the building regulations.
Okay, I find that very strange. I feel like it's the wrong way round, but anyway, just a side comment on that. And then the last question I had was in regard to some of the fire safety issues that residents had raised in the report. So I just wanted to ask, and why is that not considered? Why is that not a plan? If you're building on an existing building that does not have adequate fire regulations, but then you're adding further flats to it, I mean, it would be very concerning for me as a Labour councillor, someone who, you know, was very impacted by because I had family impacted by Grenfell. So I'm just wondering why that isn't considered as something that should be mitigated by planning. I'm just wondering that could be highlighted, please.
Again, I don't want to keep deferring to building regulations. Part B of the building regulations covers fire safety, means of escape and so forth. So that is covered in detail within the building regulations, and that will be looked at that point.
So again, after planning has been granted?
Well, at this point, we have to have a basic understanding of means of escape and fire strategy and so forth. Can appropriate vehicles access the site? The detail of the construction and how the precise fire mitigation, the means of escape, as I said, is formally considered through the building regulation process.
Okay. Again, I think that's a bit the wrong way round, but anyway.
It's something that the new London plan has addressed and has brought some elements of it in terms of taller buildings into our remit. It's something that the revisions to the government are introducing to the building regulations is also much more thorough, let's put it that way.
Okay,
so
right then. Thank you very much for answering my questions. The last one I had was just whether there's any legal reasons why this application should be refused.
When you use the term legal, we wouldn't deal with legal reasons, if you see what I mean. It would have to be a planning reason.
Planning law, yes, planning. That's what I. Yeah, when I mean legal, I mean planning. Yeah.
The reason that I have put forward a report which says a recommendation for grant is because that I have not identified any reason within any planning reason that would be sufficient to justify refusal.
Okay.
Members can balance that in reaching any decision on a planning application. It is, and Kimry is absolutely correct. In officers' view, it's being considered before the principle of an extension was refused on the grounds of design. However, it is for members to weigh in the balance the different arguments coming forward, and providing there are planning reasons put forward, members may conclude differently from officers.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I took so much time, Chair.
Got Christopher next.
Thank you, Chair. At our briefing on Monday, I had some concerns about parking, and I asked a question about the garages at the rear of the site. Obviously, since that, I've just got a follow-up question, really, which is on the site plan, the red outline seems to snake slightly and zigzag around some of the plots of the garages. So if you could just sort of recap what we discussed at briefing, and also whether some of them don't belong to this site and some do, or whether there's any mitigation that could come from perhaps redeveloping those into proper parking spaces.
Yes. So a couple of elements there. I don't have full details of the private arrangements between the landowner or developer and whoever has leases or private ownership rights over some of those garages, but I have been told that those arrangements do exist, that they are leased. The ones that are within the red line boundary, we can look at. However, some of them may be leased out, and it may not be possible for the developer to go ahead and use those because of the other interests that are involved. They have used a couple of those spaces, indeed, as you noted. The ones that are left out of the boundary cannot be considered at all because they are outside of the red line boundary.
Okay, thank you.
Marilyn, you're next. Got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, please forgive me, Councillor Assad. It is just that one thing to remember that will help you is that ownership and building regs and planning legislation are different. You can even apply for planning permission for something you don't own. So the two things don't always marry up. And it's a good thing to remember, because if you remember that, then it kind of makes it a bit easier to understand how back to front these things can be, unfortunately. But anyway, my question was, and I asked it at the briefing, but it hadn't been answered all day, so I'll ask it now. I did ask if the car parking spaces, such as they are, and there are a few extra ones, as we discussed at the briefing, are they full-sized? Because I was curious to know whether or not they were sufficient, because when you're dealing with a lack of parking, and this does have a lack of parking really, it is important that at the very least the spaces that are there are not slightly smaller than they should be, making it really difficult for people to park up in a decent sized car.
Yes. So as part of the formalization of the parking, because it's currently mostly informal parking, as you said yourself, that's quite helpful. But the issue of the size of the parking spaces, we did look at again. I wasn't able to get that information in time for the addendum, but it is included in the supplemental addendum.
Oh, is it? Oh,
yes.
Okay.
So I can confirm that. Yeah, that's okay. you only got that today.
No,
spaces are. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I must have missed it. Carry on.
That's okay. So the spaces are considered to be compliant. However, it should be noted that the parallel parking spaces that are along the northwestern site, it's okay for them to be a little bit more narrow, and that in fact the council itself uses narrower bays for their own parallel parking spaces, so those are fine. But when we looked at it again, we decided that it would be better for them to be larger than the standard size in terms of length to allow for maneuvering. So we have proposed an amendment in the supplemental agenda to condition 6 to require that to be amended.
Well, that's very helpful. Apologies if I didn't spot it. I thought I'd read it all. I must have missed it. Thank you.
Fine.
Thank you. Anjana, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would like to say one thing to Councillor Assad is that I, even now, being on a planning committee for a long time, still struggle to understand how how planning permission can be given to add so many floors. This is nothing. I've seen many floors being added in South Harrow and other places, and I always used to kind of worry about it, that how can you give a permission, add all this floor, and then find out from the building regulation, does their structure or whatever findings, and say that it is sound to build all these many floors. I asked this question again and again. Even last briefing I was asking on Monday to Beverly, because I was also worried about if something happens to this building, like you mentioned Granville, what has happened, we already know all of us. If something like that happens, who will be responsible for it? Will it be council? If it's building regulations that is responsible, in another word, it is council who will be liable, is what I know. Marilyn is saying no, but I know Beverly said no at the meeting. But this is something that I worry about all the time. Anyway, I will ask my question. As it is, this application, we are adding a floor and adding only how many? 8 flats, two bedroom, 8 flats, right? We are adding on that floor. There's going to be another development there in that area, so we are making this area even more tighter than what it is, more densely populated than it is, and they're going to lose all this green space which they have enjoyed, and all the parking as well, which they have all enjoyed all this time. So I'm really worried about it, that we are adding more stress to this particular area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anjana. So we got objector Nisha Chauhan. Could you please speak for 3 minutes?
Yeah, thank you very much. To express our concerns regarding this planning application, imagine, if you will, living in my flat 1. If this development goes ahead, Not only will I have a wall outside my living room window, I will also have 5 cars parked outside my kitchen window, plus a refuse store containing all the rubbish for 32 flats just beyond. That will smell particularly in the summer. Besieged by cars and concrete, this is a far cry from the home I pictured raising my family in when I came to live at Northcote. I represent here not just my views, but the views of all the residents and the neighbours who have submitted their many comments. Many of our concerns regarding noise, car pedestrian safety within the site, room layout, refuse and parking have been jumbled together under vaguely worded conditions, as suggested by the planning officer. 2 frequently raised important concerns on parking and noise are to be dealt with through pre-occupation rather than pre-commencement conditions. Surely this is too late to address once the construction is complete. These conditions need to be addressed prior to construction to protect the rights of people of Northcote. The proposed parking will cause significant loss of trees, including the last surviving pear tree of the original orchard on this site and garden land. These have provided the community with much needed outdoor space and comfort during COVID-19 pandemic. Instead, concrete will be poured into garden land, causing further ecological damage. We are concerned that the original building is in a state of disrepair and may not be able to withstand an additional floor of flats. No structural survey has been carried out and the plans do not include the construction of fire escapes. These are concerns, particularly in light of Grenfell, that any extra story may have to be constructed from lighter materials, which may be more combustible. The planning officer's report states that this development would make a small contribution to the borough's housing stock, yet none of the 17 flats that will be built as a result of the planning of the Northcote planning application since 2018 will contribute to the borough's affordable housing stock. In 2011, a planning application for a mere bin store was refused because, and I quote, it would result in a visually intrusive form of development which would detract from the attractive open setting of this block of flats. Look at how times have changed. You are our last chance to stop this harm from being inflicted on our community. This developer has not once attempted to consult with us directly on these plans. As existing residents, we feel our concerns and well-being are being ignored. Your vote today should be driven by your duty of care, your conscience, and not by political alliances, nor by Greater London housing targets. For us, this is more than just a fight for the physical and mental well-being of our families. This is a fight for fairness and justice. I ask you again, would you want to live here?
Thank you, Nisha. Got David Dixie, applicant. 3 minutes to speak. David.
Hi there, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present a proposal. The proposal is for the creation of a 3rd floor comprising of 8 flats together with parking, a new refuse and recycling store and a bicycle store. We have been through an extensive consultation with the planning officer and have ironed out the items of concern, and the scheme you see before you tonight is the culmination of that process and represents a cohesive design proposal which will lead to successful development. The additional storey will be constructed in materials to match the existing under a pitched tiled roof and fully respects the design characteristics of the host building. As part of the proposal, an additional 5 parking spaces will be provided. The Transport Assessment and Highways Department have considered this to be acceptable. Car-free and car-light development is promoted within the London Plan and also Harrow Council through their controlled parking zones. It should also be noted that a review of the census data for the local area shows that around 45% of flats have no access to a car. During the application process, it was brought to the applicant's attention that there is a problem with the existing waste storage arrangements, and they've agreed to provide a new enclosed, secure refuse and recycling store for the entire development. A new bicycle store is also proposed in line with the council's policy and the London Plan. The scale of the development is sensitive to the existing buildings and neighbouring properties. Its appearance is simple and modest and has no adverse effects on the existing character of and appearance of the host building and the immediate locale. To sum up, the applicant's intention is to propose a development that will provide much needed high quality residential units. We respectfully ask the committee to uphold the planning officer's recommendation and grant permission for the proposed development. Thank you.
Councillor Norman Stevenson, 5 minutes. 5 minutes to speak.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't want to bore the committee for too long, but it's me again. Right. So on this development, what is being proposed is this new floor, 8 new flats, cramming into this development. Yeah, we need the properties, but this isn't very sensitive and sensible. I don't think. I mean, the height of the building will increase by some 3 meters. Yeah, no question about it. It's obtrusive and very noticeable to all the properties round and about. It's very interesting that there are 8 new flats, and they're going to increase the number of spaces, car parking spaces in this overcrowded car park by 5. So 8 new flats and 5 new spaces. I think about that, the logic of that. It actually says here there's going to be a loss of some green space to accommodate the increased parking, and there's also going to be a children's play area, which of course is good, but there is going to be a loss of some green space to accommodate the increased parking, and that increased parking isn't enough. It's already been discussed. Potential fire safety issues. We've been told it's not a planning consideration, but you're going to be making a decision tonight. Will we allow this development to be overdeveloped and planning fire safety issues not even to be considered at this stage? We've seen already there's a petition that's been presented of 214 local people who wish to object to this, and they really think that it's going to affect things. We've heard the person speaking, the resident speaking in opposition to it just a moment ago, how she and her family's lives are going to be affected, and she's just one example of many. I just want to raise traffic and parking again, because this I think is key, and this has gone on and on for years on this development. Remember, the committee's already agreed that instead of 2 access points onto the road, there's now only going to be 1, but there's going to be more cars here now. It's difficult to pull out of that onto the Rickmansworth Road. More cars and less access, and I really think that the committee hopefully will reconsider those elements. I know they link to the last one we discussed, but it's the same principle about trying to cram in too much into a space. There will be more parking as a result, and not enough parking probably, and that causes some problems. And then that increased traffic out onto the Rickmansworth Road with less access because of the earlier agreed development. It's very interesting that there's a comment on this report, and it says in summary the proposal would not be considered to result in a significant increase in traffic and parking impacts, and the parking and servicing arrangements are considered satisfactory. You can read that, but no disrespect to the officer that wrote that, but that is just blatantly not the case. I've explained, and we all know about the traffic and parking situations on this development, and this report says that there are no issues. So please, I would just ask you to basically refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Comments? I've got Marilyn. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, there is something that we can do about this, because it doesn't have an extant permission, and therefore the consistency issue and the indelible stain doesn't apply, which kind of taps into some of the very good questions that Councillor Assad has been asking, because actually it's not about can we legally refuse this, it's that we have all to play for. We can refuse this. It doesn't have planning permission as yet, and there's no established principle. So I'm going to propose refusal because I think that this is absolutely unacceptable. And there are two main reasons why. The first one is that although I do agree with the officers that the redesign of the roof is preferable in the sense of the architectural merit of the building, because it follows the fenestration and the general style of the building. But as a result, because the actual extra floor is there, and on top of that is a roof the same kind of dimensions as that which is there, but only on top of 3 stories, you're actually dealing, as I think Councillor Stevenson quite rightly said, with something that is 3 meters higher. And in this context, and on this site, and in this environment, I think that it's not so much the measurement of the height, but it's the appearance. And looking at the elevations, which are quite useful, and having visited and had a look at the building, I think this is going to make this very bulky looking. I understand why the officers have preferred this design, but I don't think it's the right way. And I'm not happy about it at all. I think it's completely out of keeping, actually, in this environment. And the second reason is not particularly the P-TEL score, although I still think it's relevant. It is low. But it's mostly to do with the fact that in reality, in this kind of location, and the fact that we're dealing with something that is all the way down a long drive and is really quite remote from, the highway even, to not offer at least a parking space per unit is completely unacceptable. And whereas I'm the first person to admit, because I've read it cover to cover, it's a cure for insomnia actually, but the 2021 London plan it doesn't make it easy to use not enough parking as a reason for refusal. I accept that. But our development management policy plan, DM42, for example, and also our own core strategy, our 2012 core strategy, part S, I won't read it because it's, technical stuff, it's too boring, but it is actually very possible for us legitimately to use as a reason for refusal that there isn't enough parking. There actually isn't on this site. Clearly, it would be better if it didn't happen at all, and therefore it wouldn't be an issue. But we're looking at what we're looking at, so we have to deal with the actual application that's in front of us. So there are 2 reasons for refusal, which I'm going to propose. Number 1 is the proposed additional floor would introduce unwelcome mass and scale to the existing building, to the detriment of the character of the area and the adverse effect it would have on the residential amenity within the locality, contrary to policy CS1 of the Harrow Core Strategy 2012, D1 of the London Plan 2021, and the Harrow Development Management Policy DM1 2013. And the second reason is the proposal offers a lack of car parking spaces to the detriment of the amenity of future occupiers, contrary to policy DS1 Part S, Harrow Core Strategy 2012, and D1 of the London Plan 2021, and DM42 of the Harrow Development Management Policy 2013. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Marion. Angela, you got comments?
I just got one comment, and then I would like to second the refusal. I think somebody said that Northwood Hill Station is very near to where this development is going to be. According to me, it is very far from there. It is really far from there. And 15-minute walk for who? An adult? What about children? Young people wanting to go on the trains. So I think, again, this is something for the officers to actually look into properly. I think this is happening quite often now. as far as the local transport is concerned. They always put a time limit down, but they don't actually say for who. For an adult to walk 15 minutes, I don't think even I would be able to walk from there to Northwood Hill Station in 15 minutes. So can we be more realistic in future when we are actually producing this kind of reports, especially when somebody is mentioning we are supposed to be car free and we are supposed to be using local transport and we are supposed to be doing this, that and the other, but it has to be practical is what I would like to say. So in future, I would like to see more evidence, please. Thank you. I would like to second the application to refuse.
Thank you. Before we take a vote on refusal, may I ask Beverly, she wants to come in?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. I hope you don't mind in terms of the relevance of the London Plan policies versus the Harrow core strategy and development management policies. Just for you to bear in mind in your reasoning on this, the London Plan is the most up-to-date statement of planning policy, and therefore is the most relevant standard that we would look at to apply in terms of assessing impacts. So I do note the comments. There are policies within our own core strategy and development management policies, but the most up-to-date policy is the London Plan, and the report addresses that in page 195 and London Plan policy T6. In considering whether to use that as a reason for refusal, I'm just advising you accordingly that is the most up-to-date policy. You will, of course, reach your own conclusions.
Thank you, Beverly. May I just request the guest? I think we don't take any questions or comments from the guest. You already have your petition presented, so thank you.
Chairman,
yes, Marilyn, yeah.
Just say, I'm very happy to add policy T6 to the reason for refusal that I have tried to write, but I don't think it really helps that much. You're absolutely right, Beverly, that actually that is the latest policy, because it depends on the cycle. We're just starting to do a new core strategy, aren't we? But it's still, nonetheless, it's very clear in our adopted policies what they are, and it does support that reason for refusal. I don't really think that T6 absolutely supports it, but if you think it will help, I'm happy to add it. In my view, do not think it will.
And I would agree with that. I don't think it would help. I'm just saying if something's being refused for a policy reason, that is the most up-to-date policy.
I get it.
Just advising, but like, you reach your own conclusions.
Sorry, can I just come in as well on the question relating to the distance from the station? I've just measured it on our maps, on our GIS maps, and it's 0.6 miles. So just over half a mile from the site as you walk along the road. That's not as the crow flies.
Thank you. I'll ask
I'm sorry, Chair, but it doesn't mean anything to me, 0.06, whatever, until one doesn't walk. How do you know how long it takes you? So I will start myself measuring now. 0.06 is how long does it take from in future. Thank you, Ola, for that.
You're welcome.
Anna, you got any comments? Because
yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to understand how planning application, sorry, I'm new to planning, obviously, but I'm just trying to understand how you can refuse a planning application based on car parking space, because having read the report, I think it's quite clearly laid out that you know, the parking arrangements would result in an increase in the number of formal parking spaces, from what I understand from the report, if that's correct. So I just want to understand how that would be possible. I mean, for me personally, the only reason why I would ever reject this is based on the fire safety issues. But unfortunately, the fire safety issue comes after planning is granted, and therefore, would it come? So the question I have for then is, would it come back if it failed the fire safety regulation? Would it come back to planning? It wouldn't.
Beverly, can you explain?
If I might take
if I might take those, the reason, yes, they're formalising the spaces, so there might be more spaces, but there are more flats. So it is reasonable to have a look at the impact of the additional flats in terms of parking required for there, and reach a different conclusion than officers and the Highways Authority have. In terms of fire safety, if for whatever reason it can't be built under the building regulations, they need a different building, then that would be a different planning application. So it's not a matter that through the building regs they come to committee. It will be dealt with through that. If it necessitated fundamental changes to the scheme, it would be a new application.
Thank you, Marilyn. You want to come back?
Sorry to interrupt. Please forgive me. It's just that to be helpful, essentially, there are 8 flats and only 5 more spaces. So it's a simple maths. So there are flats going up on this development that have no car parking space at all, and it's a matter for the committee to form an opinion. It is all, you know, because a lot of the time with planning policy, it's how you interpret the policy. It was perfectly reasonable for members of the planning committee to interpret planning policy the way they want to, as long as it's sustainable and as long as it's a planning reason. And the reason too that I have proposed is a planning reason. The question is, do members agree with it? It's not wrong in of itself to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. So can we take now the vote on motion to refuse? Marilyn?
Yes, I've heard all the discussion and I vote in favour of the motion to refuse.
Pamana?
This is a very difficult one for me. I don't think, but personally, my perspective is that I don't agree that 3 less parking spaces is grounds to refuse this application, and therefore I'll be voting against the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions. I'll be voting against the motion.
And Jenna?
Thank you, Chair. I heard all the discussion and I actually refuse the application and support the motion. Thank you.
Simon?
Thank you. I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote for the motion to refuse.
I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion. Thank you. So we'll take a vote on the grant. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application. Thank you. Ajay?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant. Thank you.
Amana?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant the application on the condition that, you know, we ensure residents' safety and the community safety in regard once building has started. Thank you.
Marilyn?
Yes, Chairman, I obviously vote to refuse and I have heard all the discussion, but bear in mind that the Labour members of this committee have voted in favour of granting this, but I just wonder whether or not they realise that there are 2 reasons for refusal. And the first reason was about the scale of the building. It's such a pity, but there we are, it's pennies.
And Jenna?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse this application.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard absolutely all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse.
Thank you. The application is granted. Can we take 10 minutes break now to break our fast, and we'll be back about 8:13. Thank you for bearing with us, Pamana and me. Thank you. So we can now carry on for next 3 hours. Right. We've got the officers back. Matt, 101, Harrow East. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So shall I start? Is everybody back? Sorry, do you want me to start, Councillor?
Yep, please.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Let me just share my presentation with you. Just let me know if you can see that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Right, so this is Harrowview East. It's plots B1 and C1. Plot C1 you can see here in the northern corner, and plot B1 here at the southern end of the site. Both B1
Sorry,
and
Chair,
C1.
is Councillor Patel back? Are we all back?
Is Anjana back?
Photo's not on, that's all.
Oh, right, okay, sorry.
Here,
Okay.
bottom there, but she hasn't got. We can't see her.
Anjana, are you there? Matt, just wait for a couple of minutes because she's not responding. So.
Okay.
Thank Christopher.
Yeah, you're right, Chris. I'll phone her.
Yeah, hey, we got Anjana now. Okay, thank you. Matt, you can start now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share my presentation again. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay, so as I was saying, this is plots B1 and C1 on Harrowview East, plot C1 to the northern end, and plot B1 to the southern end. As you sort of see from this the plan, plot C1 and B1 already benefit from an outline planning permission and from reserve matters approval for a total of 350 units. The current proposal is a full planning permission for a total of 474 dwellings, an uplift of 124 units, retail and community space, and some car and cycle parking. I'll just take you through to the next slide. This shows a few photos of the site. This is obviously from within the site, the existing site under demolition with the Kodak chimney visible. It's a view from the south, a view of the site from Prince's Drive, a view of the site from Headstone Manor, and again, and a final view from Graham Road. I'll just take you through the actual proposals themselves. So this is plot B1. These are the proposed elevations. I've got a slide here for you that shows you a comparison between the approved massing at reserve matters and the proposed revised scheme massing. So as you can see, the two buildings, the rectangular building here will increase from 5 stories to 6 stories, and the taller building will increase by a story as well, from 8 to 9. It's a CGI here of what it will look like. So you can see the additional floor is sort of in that roof area here. It's adding 14 units in all for the 2 blocks. On plots C1, these are the elevations. I do apologise, they're quite small. So you can see the proposed elevations. I've got I'll take you to a slide that was sent around actually earlier today as a response from the agent to the queries that you raised on Monday evening. And this shows you, this is the reserve matters approval here. You can see the 2 main blocks of C1 there and there. Please, these are the blocks of D1 to D6 and D7 here. But this is the site we're looking at here. So the red numbers, I hope you can see them, show you the heights as approved of each of the individual buildings, and this slide shows you the heights of the proposed buildings. So as you can see, the main increases in height are here, where the building increases. This is at the end of the green link. The building increases from 10 to 14 stories. In this location here, increases from 6 to 10 stories, and also this building here increases from 5 to 9 stories. The other buildings do also increase by, if you can see the numbers, by a story. This element here increases by 1 story. This actually remains the same height, but again, this element increases by a story, as do most of the other elements, the smaller elements. What is changing, as you can probably see, is that the architects have punched through holes, if you like, through the large elevations to break them up a little bit and to provide more sort of daylight and sunlight into the other buildings and into the courtyard areas in between. So this, you can see that's here, here, and in this location here. We've got another CGI here, sort of a diagram that sort of shows you the proposals. You can see again you've got building H1, which is going to be the tallest one at the end of the green link. I've also got another diagram here for you. This shows you again a elevation of how, looking down the green link, and this is building H1, the main tall building at 14 stories, and just another view down the avenue, which is along here. So what it will look like. I do have a further CGI that I've added to my presentation for you. This is again down the avenue, but this shows you plot D5, the approved 18-story building, plot D7, which is up at 10 stories. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to move that. I apologise. 10 stories, and here you've got the proposed H1 building at 14 stories. So if you imagine as approved, it's 10 stories. So it's a little lower. So in context, it's a gradual step up to the 18-story building. So I think from this view, we feel that actually, from a townscape, from an architectural point of view, actually works quite well, given what else has been approved on the site. In terms of the unit mix, so it's 40% affordable by HAB room. We're increasing the number of units from 350 to 474, with the requisite uplift to maintain a 40% affordable housing provision. Let's go back to block B1. Entire block B1 is affordable. That's 74 affordable units in that, and in C1 you have 107, I think, affordable housing units. Again, maintaining overall 40% affordable housing units by HAB room. In terms of car parking spaces, this has been uplifted to 152 parking spaces for the residential units, which retains the ratio as approved at reserve matters and as approved on the other elements of the site on D1 to D6 and on D7 to 0.3, which is in line with the GLA car parking standards. There's also at the bottom here of G2, as I mentioned, a retail use. At reserve matters, this was a leisure use. What the developer has done is to swap the leisure use that was going to be here and put that into D1 and D1 to D6, which has already been approved, and to swap the retail use into this location. Excuse me, I didn't mean to move that. Into this location here, which is it's a much more accessible location it's going to be a small supermarket, a metro type supermarket, sort of your top-up shop, not your main sort of weekly shop. In terms of car parking, for that, there are a total of 9 spaces within the site that are for non-residential uses. 2 of those spaces are actually in the loading bay that is being provided within this plot. So when that loading bay isn't in use, that will double up as 2 car parking spaces for any customers wishing to use the supermarket. In terms of, let me go back to this. In terms of impact on adjoining occupiers, daylight, sunlight, etc., the actual building footprint, as you will see from, I'll go back to that slide, it's on the same footprint, same locations, if you like, as already approved. So there is no additional impact in terms of overlooking, in terms of daylight sunlight. The applicant has submitted a daylight sunlight report, which quite vehemently and clearly shows that the proposals do meet the standards are set out in the BRE, and there's no concerns in that regard. In terms of the principle of development, again, it's obviously previously been established, and there's no issue there. In terms of character and appearance, as I hope I've explained, it very much continues to follow the vernacular of the previous approvals and of the reserve matters itself that was approved on there, and it's just a case of maximising the level of accommodation that's been provided, and we feel that it fits in well with the rest of the development. In terms of amenity impacts, as I explained, we feel there was no impacts from adjoining occupiers or any occupiers within the development. Again, the development proposes 40% affordable housing in line with the London plan, and there's a suite of planning obligations as well that you would have seen within my report to mitigate any other impacts. And given the above, planning committee has asked to grant planning permission subject to the conditions in the Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Matt. Questions, Marilyn?
Well, Chairman, I don't really have questions, but I am very, very concerned about this. And the reason why is because every single time we have a major development panel, and particularly on these sites, the developer turns up and wants to add more stories. And I can remember very clearly at the last meeting, Councillor Greig, who's very experienced at these things, is on the major development panel. He actually got quite angry about it. And I can see why. Because the trouble is that we have to actually start to say no. There isn't anything wrong with actually taking a view as a local authority that we are reaching a saturation point on these sites. And actually, it's not really about, do we have a sustainable argument? It gets to a point where, you know, every single time, I mean, if you look at plot C, virtually all of the blocks of flats are getting a little taller. The rationale for block H1 being much taller, it is, no question about that, is well, there's a really big building over there, which is 18 stories high. So we've got to have a bigger building here because that's big. And then we've got, you know, it can get smaller to the left and all that. Well, I mean, if you follow that logic, we're going to end up with 25 stories where the 18-story building is, and 18 stories where this block H1. I mean, they will carry on adding to the scale and the mass and the height of these buildings until it gets to a point where they don't want to do it anymore. And we will always, it seems to me, support them. And I think we've got to come to a view on that. We've got to come to a view, not in a political way, but in terms of what we consider to be the right thing for the future occupiers. You know, there are limited opportunities for infrastructure improvements. We already have an existing road network. We already have existing facilities for people. It's kind of a quote about the school, by the way. And I just feel that personally, and I can come back later if you like, Chair, but I really would like to get this out of the way and propose refusal, because I think we should start saying no. Because we did that on the erstwhile Zoom site on Harrowview West, when they wanted to keep adding height there, and they didn't carry on. They got the message. And I think that we're too readily allowing this. Yes, we need more homes, of course, but we've got to appreciate how this will affect the future occupiers and the infrastructure. And I don't follow the logic, and I'm not happy about this and enough is enough. But Chairman, if you want me to, I'm happy to come back a bit later and propose refusal.
Thank you, Marilyn. Let's take the
or I can get it out the way now. It's entirely up to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Marilyn. Christopher, you got a question? Matt, can you just go back to the full screen, please? Thank you. Christopher, you got a question?
No, Chair, actually mine was just a comment as well, really. I mean, I'm quite depressed about the sort of approach of because it looks better, because that to me really seems to be saying that 18 stories is there as a precedent. So you take that, so let's get as close to 18 as we possibly can. And as Councillor Ashton said, if you take that to its logical conclusion, well, first everything will be 18 stories and then you'll be adding extra in increments on top of that. And we don't seem to be asking whether we should go taller. It's just we could do it, therefore let's go ahead with it. And it may be futile, but I just want to express, I think I find this approach very frustrating. We should be asking the question whether we should be going any further on this development, which is already across all these plots, quite an intensely developed area.
Thank you. Anjana?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when Matt was asking whether you could see the numbers, I was not able to see the numbers even with my glasses on. But I would say that there, if you look at it, and you actually said, for me, it looked like the design. If you go back to that slide, the design that was there before and what they have proposed, and you mentioned to have a proper sunlight, right? If you look at it, if you move your cursor right to the top, yeah, all that is different to what is in existing, and look at the end over there, it looks different in the new. On the left hand side of it now, so they both look very different to me. So to me, this is kind of it's changed. Anyway, the application has actually changed, and if you're saying that the developers have done this to make sure that they have a better light, then obviously the sunlight report, which was done before, is obviously not correct. I am actually quite worried about this particular development. And actually, to be honest, everything has been said what I wanted to say by Marilyn and Chris. But all I would like to say and add is that this is already overdeveloped, and now you're adding floors to it. So why is it the developer comes and asks for whatever they do, and then they come back again and ask to add on the floors? What is the reason for them to do that? And I don't know, I'm not going into any monetary benefit out of it, but I would say this is just not on. If they came and went for the application and asked for what they want, if we have agreed to it, why are they coming back and asking to add so many floors? And to me, I think lessons are not learned from 1960s and whatever not we've seen, the development that had to be brought down. To me, this is also going towards that. Like in future, this will be looked upon as chalk hill and all that kind of development in future, in years to come. So to me, this is really not on, and especially planning application, for me, it has changed quite a bit. So if Matt can please explain what is happening there in those two areas which I just asked.
Thank you, Anjana. Can you go back to Pamela first, and then Matt, you can come back.
Okay.
Pamela, you got your comments, question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. So the first is, how many times has the developer come to ask for added floors? Is this the first time, or?
You're breaking your network.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Better.
Yeah, so how many times has the developer come to ask the planning committee to add floors to the buildings in the Harrowview East site? That's the first question. The second question is, obviously during the briefing I asked some of these questions, but I want this on the record. In terms of affordable housing, when we say affordable housing, we mean shared ownership and affordable rent, not market units. I just want officers to clarify that. And the reason why I'm saying that is because as a young person in Harrow, I haven't been able to buy a house, okay? And many other young people like me also can't afford to buy because it's very expensive. The whole point of affordable housing is so that young people like myself can actually get onto the housing ladder and get their foot in, right? However, I'm seeing all these flats go up across Harrow that are passed by the planning committee, and yet when I asked for a breakdown of how many Harrow residents have bought that, because of the definition of affordable housing, only 6 shared ownership units have been sold so far to applicants who live or work in Harrow. That to me is really, really disappointing and actually quite concerning. If anything about this development or any of the issues I have about this development, it's not the added floors, it's the fact that if you're adding floors, why are we not selling those units to people who live in Harrow, to Harrow residents? So that's my main gist and my main issue. And then the other one was in regards to the parking and the selling of parking spaces for those who are buying market units. So I'd like all of this to be clarified on the record here for Planning Committee, because I know this is going to go on the YouTube, Harrow Council YouTube site, and I think that Harrow residents don't know this information, and it should be on the record. So I'd like those points to be clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela.
Okay. I was going to say, Matt, do you want me to pick up some of those in terms of the history of the site and what's gone on?
Yes, you'll know better than I.
With that, so as I've been involved with this site for many years, in terms of the increase in height on plots B1 and C1, this is the first application to vary over and above the approved reserve matters application. So this is the first one. On the remainder of the site, again, following initial reserve matters, there have been one set of changes to the agreed reserve matters on other phases of the development. There haven't been multiple changes on any individual phase, as I understand it. In terms of affordable housing, so yes, you're correct in terms of affordable housing, that there are very, very specific definitions within national legislation and within the London Plan in terms of providing London affordable rented products or shared ownership. The council's policy, and consistent with the London Plan, is that on any schemes coming forward above 10 units, 40% of those units should come forward either by number of units or number of habitable rooms. 40% of the accommodation should be provided within that affordable bracket. That is a policy requirement. We cannot require more than that. Unfortunately, I do share your comments in terms of affordability for people living in Harrow, and I fully understand that, but that's all that we can require under policy requirements. And within that 40%, 60% of that comes forward as social London affordable rent, 40% comes forward as shared ownership. There's the 60-40% split. This application meets those requirements. So the rest of the 60% goes out to the open market, and it will be sold to whoever. In terms of the comment that only 6 shared ownership units have been sold to Harrow residents, only 6 shared ownership units have been sold, full stop. So 100% of those that have been sold as shared ownership have gone to Harrow residents, which I was actually very encouraged to hear. Because I think there are many people like you said yourself that is needed. So I hope that gives you some assurance on that. And in relation to the parking, you had asked a question in relation to parking spaces being sold. We have had confirmation from the applicants today, which confirmed my understanding in any event, that the parking spaces aren't being sold independently. So if people want to buy a flat, they can choose to buy a flat with a space or without a space. If they buy a flat with a space, that flat is going to cost more because it comes with that additional piece of land, that additional parking space. So it comes at a higher premium than someone who buys a flat and doesn't have a parking space. They are not being sold off separately. So they are being sold in association with specific flats, and I'm hoping that would address the questions. I think that's covered everything that you've asked.
Yes, I just wanted clarity in terms of the market units. So that's not being sold to Harrow residents first. That's being sold to anybody.
There is no mechanism that would allow us to require them to do that. So where we do have control, we have mechanisms attached through Section 106 legal agreement that require Harrow First marketing to be sold. For the market housing, there is no mechanism that will allow us to require Harrow First people to buy.
Okay. That's not a great thing to hear, but I understand that's above our powers, I guess. Thank you very much for clarifying.
Thank you.
Marlene, you got another question?
Well, just that I deferred to others, before, and I'm not happy about this. And by the way, just for Councillor Assad's benefit, because you do a rota, so you're not at every meeting, but at the last meeting we did give permission for a pocket living development, which is a kind of a private scheme, but in that context, I think I'm right in saying that it is going to be marketed first to Harrow residents. So there are quite a lot of very good ideas coming forward to help young people like your good self onto the property ladder. But anyway, getting back to this, I'm not happy about it. I think that we have to say enough and no more with these massive tall buildings. I'm not happy that you don't want to end up with concrete jungle. You don't want to end up with the mistakes, as Councillor Patel so rightly said before, that we've done in the past with these very high density developments. And I just think that it was already, to me, at the absolute edge of what could ever be accepted, frankly, and most people are unhappy with it as it stands. To add insult to injury, which is what this does, to me, is unacceptable. And so I'm going to propose refusal. And there are two reasons. The first reason is the proposed increase in height, 4 stories of Block H1 in Plot C1 would result in an overbearing appearance in the street scene, owing to its prominent location within the site, to the detriment to the amenities of future occupiers within the locality. Contrary to policy CS1 of the Harrow Core Strategy 2012, London Plan D1 2021, Harrow Development Management Policies 2013 DM1. And the second reason is the cumulative increase in heights of numerous blocks throughout the plots would result in an over-intensification of an already excessively intensive development, and would result in a loss of residential amenity to future occupiers, contrary to policy CS1 of the Harrow Core Strategy 2012, London Plan D1 and D2 2021, and the Harrow Development Management Policies DM1. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. Christopher, would you like to? Yeah.
Chair, yes, I'd like to second the motion for refusal for the two reasons that Councillor Ashton set out in detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt, you raised your hand. You want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to go back to the point that Councillor Patel raised earlier about daylight sunlight. I don't think, maybe I wasn't particularly clear in my presentation, so I just want to revisit that and just to clarify the point I'd made. What I was saying was that I wasn't saying that the daylight sunlight report for the original scheme was faulty in any way. What I was trying to explain is the reason they've punched these holes through, well, one of the reasons, A, from an appearance point of view, so you don't get overly large blocks, but also to allow more daylight for the new proposal in light of the higher buildings, etc. So I wasn't saying that the previous proposal was inadequate in any way. I was just explaining that the holes have been punched through so that it works better with the whole proposal. I also just wanted to, I don't know if Beverly said this earlier in response to Councillor Assad, in terms of the affordable rent units, Section 106 requires that 100% of the nominations will have to come from Harrow's waiting list. So basically means that all of these units will be let to Harrow residents. I appreciate it doesn't quite answer the concern you are having, but just so you know, that will be the case. And also with the car parking issue, yes, as Beverly explained with the market housing, they do sell those spaces at a premium because obviously, as Beverly explained, they're buying an extra piece of land, a parking space. But in terms of the affordable housing units themselves, I understand that those do not have an additional charge, but they will be apportioned in a manner where the larger units will get parking spaces, but not, for example, the one-bed units. So like the family units would get one, but the one-bed units wouldn't. Also, just there's a slight error in my presentation I noted. If I just clarify, on the last slide, if I just share that again with you, I just thought I'd clarify for clarity. Can you all see that? In terms of objections, there were actually, I believe, 10 letters. Just double check, sorry.
Yeah, it was 10.
Yeah, 10, sorry. Yeah, it was 10, not 0. So I do apologise for that. That's just a typo in my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Pamela, you got your hand up still, or?
Yeah, sorry, I just added a question. Is there a limit of how many times a developer can come and ask for added floors to a building?
There isn't a limit. They can come back as many times as they want. So should they come back for further intensification, we will consider at that point whether the site is capable of taking any more accommodation. They haven't, to my knowledge, that is not on the cards. But we will have that discussion with them, because I think Councillor Ashton is quite right. At some point, a line must be drawn. Officers consider that this is okay. It will be for members to determine as they see fit for this application.
Yes, Beverly, we've reached that point. That's the point I'm making. It's a matter of opinion.
Yes, it is.
Anjana, you got to say something? You're mute. You're muted. Anjana, you.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Matt, it wasn't you who said that Sunlight report is maybe not correct. I am saying that, and that is why, and I can see that now that they have actually put so many floors on the top, 4, 5 floors they have put on the top. So obviously Sunlight is going to be, affected with the other blocks wherever they are. So this actually has changed in design as well. It's not just adding the floor. It's at if you look at it, the planning, to be honest, it's not just adding the floor here. The whole structure has changed. So should there not be a new application for it?
And this is actually a full planning application, yes. So it is a full planning application.
Yeah, if it is a full planning application, I mean, I can just not believe it that, 6-story building has gone up to 10, 10 has gone up to 14, 5 has gone up to 9, 5 floor has gone up to 7. My God, all this has gone up so many floors, and I'm talking about lot C1 in that area only. I'm talking about. I'm only just looking at one area. But can Sunlight report be challenged? Who actually produced the report? Independent person, or is this the council officers produced the Sunlight report?
It was produced by a consultant working for the developer. In terms of assessment, it was us officers that assessed it.
I would actually like to see this report as well, because this is a development. And as Councillor Ashton said, I would also say the same thing. Enough is enough, and it is really up to us to decide whether we should be adding so many floors and make people's life a misery as far as Sunlight is concerned. I don't think any one of us would like to live in a place like that where our sunlight is compromised. Because vitamin D is already very rare. Vitamin D is already very rare in this country. We don't have enough sunlight.
Thank you.
And to have that is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we just take a vote on motion to refuse? I'll start with myself. I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse the application. Thank you. Ajay?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and I vote against to refuse.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote in favour of the motion to refuse.
Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and I actually vote for the motion to refuse this application.
Padmana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote against.
Marlene?
Thank you, Chair. I vote in favour of the motion.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse.
Thank you. And the motion to grant, I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant the application. Thank you. Ajay?
Sorry, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant. Thank you.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse.
Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse. What a shame.
Padmana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Marlene?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. And as Councillor Patel says, it's just so sad.
Thank you. Simon?
Thank you. I've heard all the discussion. I vote to grant.
Thank you. The application is granted. So the next one is 203, which is Congress House, Line Road. Is Kemery again?
Yes, thank you. I'll put the presentation up for you.
Thank you.
So this site is in the Harrow Town Centre, along Lyons Road and not that far away from Station Road. This is the site here, you can see. The application we're dealing with is in effect the equivalent of a renewal of a previous permission which is now expired. This is the building as it is currently. It does have permission through prior approval to convert the majority of the floors that are existing from office to residential. You can see the context here. The picture here shows the undercroft parking, which we'll be discussing in a little bit. So the proposal is to do some additions to the building to create 6 new flats. The first part would be in that undercroft that we just looked at is existing. That is this part here. So those flats would fill in the space there and would be 1-bedroom flats. Adjacent to it is a cycle storage, which would accommodate cycle and waste storage, which would accommodate cycling and waste for both the new flats we are discussing here, as well as the prior approval flats, which do have permission and would likely be implemented at the same time. In addition, there's a proposal to add a 7th floor, which would be set away from the edges of the roof and would contain 4 additional flats. These would be 2 1-bedroom flats and 2 2-bedroom flats with terraces on the rooftop. This is the existing elevations and the proposed. The proposal is exactly identical in layout to the previous, and as you can see here, the elevations are also the same. Car parking will be provided, including a very high percentage of disabled parking on site, which would be in accord with the policies. We are actually allowing a little bit more than the new London Plan policies would require because of the previous permission and the fact that it does have previous parking on site. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Padmana?
Yeah, sorry, I just had one question in regards to the flood risk that I read in the report. If you could just clarify because it's only recommended to the developer to do something about that, and it's not something that they have to do. So I was just wondering if that flood risk is there, you know, why is it only a recommendation? Why don't they have to do it as part of the the grant for planning.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the plans again to show this. I think this is going to be the best one to look at here. So the area that is actually a flood risk is very small. It is only, if you can see my cursor, only along here, along the boundary. Now, in addition to it being very small and only along the boundary, if you look at the photos here, you can perhaps see it's not quite as clear here as in some of the other photos that might be in the report. There's a fall in ground levels from here to there. So this part of the building isn't in the flood zone. The flood zone is only up against these adjacent buildings on Station Road. So the actual development is outside of the flood zone. In addition, this is actually an outline application. The only matters that would be reserved is the landscaping. And we would anticipate, we would expect, and we would ask for that those reserved matters to include the inclusion of some landscaping, which would then address the flood risk. So the flood risk would need to be addressed through works to the curtilage, which would fall under that reserved matters.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just got one question about the parking. Where the parking spaces are going to be? You just go back on.
Yep, certainly. Here we go. There we go. So parking spaces will be to the sides of the buildings here and here.
Right.
You can actually see, although this is not part of the condition, that there's some indicative soft landscaping here as well.
And how many parking spaces are in total?
There are 15 in total. Some of them are, as you can see from this plan here, are ones that are being shown because they've been included in the permission for the prior approval. There are 6 spaces that are dedicated to this permission.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? So we can, yes, Marlene?
Yes, Chairman, just as an aside, and please forgive me, I think I'm just a little bit tired. I think I misspoke when I voted. I should have said I vote to refuse. It would be preposterous and perverse of me to say grant when I proposed refusal, and I do hope that I can be allowed to correct that.
Okay, thank you, Marlene. So officers will correct it.
I have absolutely no. I do, but it's obviously getting older.
No worries. Thank you.
But as regards this application, it's okay. Fine.
Thank you. So can we go for vote? We can start vote to grant. So I heard all the application and vote to grant the application. Amana?
I've heard everything and I vote to grant.
And Jenna?
I've heard the discussion and I vote to grant. Thank you.
Ajay?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant. Thanks, Chair.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Merlin?
I'll try and get this right this time. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Thank you. The application is granted. So the next one, 204, which is Trinity House, again is Kemery. You got a busy evening.
A very busy evening. Thank you. So we'll take a look at this one. This one also relates to another application that has come through previously, and it is also in the town centre, actually quite near to the site we were just looking at, but it is Trinity House over here along Station Road. This application was previously refused, however, it was then subsequently allowed at appeal. The permission that is before you is very similar to the appeal scheme. There are only some very, very minor differences. So This is the application site in conjunction with neighboring development, which some of which has been recently extended itself, as you can see here. And this is the rear of the site. So the application involves the conversion of the first floor and the third floor to HMO units with an additional fourth floor, which would provide amenity space. So the units that are being shown here on the first floor and third floor are similar to the scheme that was allowed at appeal, with some minor changes to the layout. Here and here they are. The fourth floor is consistent because it contains the amenity space and terrace area for the occupiers. The proposal does also differ in that it proposes a slightly different treatment for the windows and the cladding as shown here. This is the existing, which shows the 3-story height that it has now. In addition, there will be a larger a dedicated waste area and cycle storage at the rear. And there will be, because the ground floor is currently retail, the ground floor is being kept as it is. There are parking spaces retained for the ground floor retail space. This is an image provided by the applicant to show what it would look like. And I think that is everything to say on this one. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Kimberly. So I got Marilyn, your question?
Yes, I just a simple question, really. It's a technical one. I mean, this is more or less the same, given just a few tweaks as the previous application. So why wasn't it a non-material amendment, or have I lost the plot? Why is this on the agenda? What? I mean, I'm not being funny. It's just it's so similar. I'm not altogether sure why we are considering it. But it's fine. I'm just curious.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. And that I think I'm not sure if it would have been a non-material amendment or perhaps a minor material amendment, but that certainly was an option available to the applicant, and we discussed that with them, but they decided that they preferred to go through this process instead.
So am I to assume then, and please forgive me, I think it's not an unreasonable question, that this must have cost them a lot more money to do it this way then?
Well, I don't know that because I don't know what their costs and outlay were, but they had already submitted. Oh, sorry.
If it's a brand new application, which is why we're looking at it, obviously it would be on the agenda if it was a minor amendment or something like that. If it's a brand new application, then presumably they had to pay a full fee. I'm just curious. I find it odd. I'm not. I don't with it. It is.
I understand. I understand the cost benefit analysis. I'm not privy to. That's their private information. I'm not fully informed of why they made this decision because I'm not privy to their private conversations. I don't know why they chose to take this route, but they did have both options and they chose to take this route.
So it's a full application. Normally when you reapply, you have a full application. I don't need to, mind you, we all know it's a published record what our pricing structure is anyway. So it's not about something private, really. I wouldn't dream of doing that. But I'm just curious as to why it's on the agenda and why it's full application.
They're just it is on the agenda because it falls outside the scheme of delegation and therefore has to come to the committee.
I know that.
The reasons why the applicant decided to take this route rather than a non-material amendment, I'm not them. I can't answer the question why they made that decision.
If I may come in, I'm just checking the records for the planning application. They actually benefit from a free go from this application because it was made within 12 months of a previous refusal.
Okay.
And yeah, it was also made, the application was also submitted alongside the appeal that they had ongoing, so it was parallel at this point. So if they were submitting the application now, then the option could be to do a non-material amendment or a minor material amendment. So, sorry, just to give you some clarification about that, I was frantically trying to look at the records.
That makes complete sense, and I'm very happy now. Understand. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Ola.
Yeah,
sure, no problem.
Thank you, Ola, for clarification. Pamana, you got a question?
Yeah, so I didn't understand any of that because I'm very new to planning, but it was good to hear. I'm a bit confused as to what the difference is between the previous application that was refused and then this one. You said there's only minor adjustments to it. From what I've read for the reasons for refusal, it's unacceptable and over-intensive use of the site and would afford an unsatisfactory standard of accommodation to the future occupiers. So I'm slightly confused as to exactly what has changed to now make it satisfactory.
Okay.
Lost an appeal. We lost the appeal.
So as we were discussing in some of the previous applications, there is scope on a lot of matters within these applications for differences of opinion, and certainly councillors have the right to come to a different opinion than what's been put forward by an officer. And in this case, the the committee, pardon me, decided that they weren't satisfied with the accommodation, and there was also another reason relating to a listed building. However, at the appeal, the inspector considered those issues and decided against that opinion and in favor of allowing it. That appeal is now a significant material consideration.
Thank you, Kevin. I think I understand. I think there was a change. There's minor changes regarding the kitchens. I think.
Yeah, there's.
Yes.
Yes. Is there anything specific you wanted to ask about that?
No, I think that it's outside now somewhere. Is it on the floors?
The kitchen, no, the kitchen is in the in roughly the same area on the 4th floor,
Right.
but they've changed the layout a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. So can you just go ahead to vote on the grant? I've heard all the application and a vote to grant the application. Thank you. Marlene?
Yes, Chair, I heard all the discussion and I vote to grant, but you can't win them all.
Thank you. Ajay?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Kaimana?
I've heard all the discussion. I vote to grant, unfortunately.
Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Simon?
Yes, I've heard all the discussions, Chair, and I vote to grant.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion. Reluctantly, I vote to grant.
Application is granted. Thank you. So we got the next one, 205 5 Spring Villa is Katie.
Hello, this is the application.
Sorry, kept you waiting for long.
No problem at all. Bear with me, I'm just going to share the slides. Okay, so this is the application for Spring Villa Road. The site is adjacent to the existing business use area. Here's the site block plan, which shows the access to Spring Villa Road. It's a Part 3, Part 4-storey office building with an undercroft car parking area. The footprint of the building has been revised following previous decision, which is in the officer's report for refusal, which was for residential accommodation. The footprint and the use of the site, the building, has been amended to satisfy the Environment Agency and the drainage team in terms of the site, because it is located within a flood risk area. This is the site. The top left is the view of Overbrook Walk from the application site. To the right is the view of Spectra House, and then bottom is the view of the Edgware Brook and the Mythian Close footbridge. These are the ground and first floor plans, the second and third floor. These are the elevations. We have had no objections from consultees,
we had one objection from a neighbour within the consultation period, which has been outlined in the officers' report, and officers are recommending the grant of permission with conditions for the reasons outlined in the report. So we asked the committee to grant permission subject to those conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions? I got one hand up. I don't know whose that one is. Yes, Marilyn. Marilyn, yeah.
At our briefing, one thing I did raise, and I think it has been addressed very well, actually, if I may say, is that what we can't have, bearing in mind the issue around this being an area that floods because of the Edgware Brook, what we can't have is a situation whereby the owners of this site, or the people building it, can then go for prior approval and then convert it into residential. Because the whole point is, which I don't find, to be honest, very logical, but anyway, there you are. That's the way the rules are, I suppose. It's not something I know that much about. But apparently you can build, because this is flooding, so floodplain, you can build opposite on a floodplain, but not residential. So a question to Katie, am I right in saying that it's very clear by condition that they can't use permitted development? They can't go and suddenly decide to do what everybody else does and make it into a block of flats.
Yeah, so as highlighted in the officer report, because of the vulnerability of the use, offices are considered a lower vulnerability use, and obviously because we wouldn't want a conversion to residential for other reasons, notwithstanding flood risk alone, we have also put a condition in the report to prevent them being able to change the use to residential under legislation.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't go behind, you know, your views and knowledge on this. It's something I don't know about, but it's still nonetheless a building, and it's still nonetheless prone to flooding. So I do know that sort of problem quite well, and there's quite a lot of issues around that area. So, I mean, I don't say that I object to it particularly, but I do find it a little bit difficult to get my head round how you can really put anything there, to be honest. But there you go. You know, you've obviously come to your view, and I don't go behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Any other questions? No, so we can go straight to grant applications. I heard all the discussion, and I vote to grant the application. Thank you. Pamana?
I heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
And Jenna?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Simon?
Thanks, Chair. I've heard all the discussion. I vote to grant.
Pamana,
I already voted, Chair.
oh, thank you, because I can't see the full screen at the moment. Thank you. The application is granted.
I think it's Ajay's left, but
Thank you. Thank you. Application is granted. Thank you.
Ajay hasn't voted.
Ajay, sorry, I can't see the full screen because I still got the presentation.
Yeah. There's the screen being shared.
if
yes,
Katie
Chair.
takes down the screen, it'd be easier.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
It'd be. Sorry, Ajay.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. I have heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Thank you. The application is granted. We got the next two applications. Vaughan Road Car Park, 206 is Katie Perkin.
Good evening, members.
Good evening.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Excellent. So I'll be I'll be presenting two applications tonight relating to the same site, which is the Vaughan Road car park. An addendum was issued in relation to both applications to summarise a letter which was submitted on behalf of the applicants. So obviously the Vaughan Road car park is located on the corner of Vaughan Road and Besborough Road. And here are some photographs of the site. So planning permission was granted in 2017 to redevelop the site to provide a 4 to 8 storey building, providing commercial and community floor space on the ground floor and 33 apartments on the upper floors. That planning permission was granted subject to conditions, and 2 of those conditions required technical details to be submitted to the local planning authority for approval. The development itself is not before the committee, as planning permission has already been granted. The only matters to be discussed relate to those technical details, and any other considerations would be immaterial. So the first application which I am presenting relates to condition 10, which requires a construction method statement and logistics plan to be submitted to the local planning authority for approval. Harrow Council's Highways Department is the local highways authority, and they were consulted on this application. The submitted details have been prepared in accordance with the TfL format guidance and was amended in accordance with the comments that we received from the highways engineer, and that engineer has confirmed that the details are acceptable. In addition, we did request the highways manager to review the details, and he has also confirmed that the details submitted pursuant to condition 10 are acceptable, and therefore this application is recommended for approval. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Katie. Any questions? No? So can we just go straight to grant application? So I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant application. Thank you. Ajay, I'll start with you now.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Merlin?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant, Chair. Thank you.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Pamana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Simon?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Application is granted. So Katie, are you going to go to the next one also? This is for both.
Yes, I will do. I will just go straight to kind of the main point. So the second application relates to conditions 11, 12 and 13 relating to levels, surface and foul water drainage. The applicant has submitted all of the required details. The council's principal landscape architect has reviewed the levels plan and has confirmed that they are acceptable. The local lead flood authority have reviewed the submitted drainage strategy, and the engineer has confirmed that those details are acceptable. In addition, we did request the drainage manager to review the details, and he has also confirmed that the submitted details are acceptable. Therefore, this application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Katie. So I got a question from Merlin.
Just a general comment. I am very unhappy that this development was ever granted. It should never have been granted. It is a travesty. We've ended up in a situation whereby we've got a principle established that we'll never get rid of for 8 stories high on this site. We should never have sold it. And frankly, it's an absolute disgrace what's happened here. And you know, yeah, fine. If we can't do anything about it, and we can't, I understand that completely. But it doesn't mean that that we can't express our dissatisfaction at the behaviour of this administration in this respect.
Thank you. Anjana?
Thank you very much. I'm actually disgusted that this application came and council, this administration gave a permission for 8-story building. And at that time, unfortunately, none of the ward councillor came and backbenched and said 8-story building is not acceptable in this area. So I'm really disgusted by the way the people are treated in West Harrow and not having or adopting the policy which doesn't allow this kind of development and ruin the livelihood of people that lives around that area. And I hope there won't be any more trouble for the residents when this is being built. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. It's just to second what my colleagues have said, really. And I know a question was raised by a member of the public last week about, sorry, at the last committee, about where in the council such discussions take place and whether we have an opinion as members of the planning committee or as a council as a whole over what is a tall building in the in suburbs. And I hope not just at a private meeting of something like the planning policy working group, but actually at a public committee where it's in front of members of the public. I hope that this can be discussed and agreed, and that in the future something like 8 stories on a site like this just would be completely out of consideration from the beginning.
Thank you, Christopher. Your point noted. Thank you. Can we just go ahead and vote on the application? So I heard all the application, I heard all the discussion and vote to grant the application. Thank you. Ajay?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Simon?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions, vote to grant.
Anjana?
Well, there wasn't much of discussion, but I've heard whatever officer had to say and very reluctantly grant.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and vote to grant.
Ramana?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion, such as it was, and I vote to grant.
Thank you very much. The applications are granted. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening. Officers, particularly bearing with us up almost 3 hours.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
The last meeting will be of May, I think. And I'll see you then.
So, one more meeting.
Have a good evening and have a good day tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.